All right, this is Andrew Ehrlichson again. You've just gone through the CRUD operations, creating, reading, updating, and deleting data using the Mongo shell. And now I'm going to take you through those same operations, but this time using Pymongo. And after that, I'll get you ready for this week's homework by teaching you a little bit more about the blog project that we're going to be building in this course. But first, let's review. You have MongoD, and MongoD, of course, is the server that runs the database itself. And you were working in the Mongo shell in the last few lessons, and the Mongo shell talks using bson to MongoD to access data, to insert data, update data, etc. Now you're going to learn about doing it from Pymongo. You're going to write your application code in Python, and this Python is going to talk to the database through Pymongo, which is a Python library to allow you to access the database. And Pymongo talks to the database server using bson, using the wire protocol. So let's get started. Now, if you've been following these lessons sequentially, you probably already have this grade data in your database. But I don't have it on my computer, so I'm going to put it back on there. And to do that, I have this program, create student collection data.js. This is JavaScript that I'm going to import into the Mongo shell. I'm going to redirect it into the Mongo shell. And this is a very simple program. Just uses school database. It drops the scores collection. And then for the type of exam, homework, and quiz, and for 100 students, it puts in one document per student for each type. So for a student, there'll be an exam, a homework, and a quiz with a score that's been randomized. It's wrapping here, but it's just a random number. And it inserts it into the database. So let's run that. I'm going to run that by calling Mongo and redirecting the input from create student collection.js. This is on a Unix box. So if you're familiar with Unix, you know how that works. So if I do that, it runs successfully. All right, and then if I run Mongo and use the school database and then look in the scores collection, I see a bunch of data, and each of the documents has a student ID, a type of either homework or exam or quiz, and a score. And I'll print one out so that it'll print it pretty, and you can see what they look like. They look like this. All right, so now we want to retrieve some of this data from Python. So we have a program to do that, and I'm going to walk you through it line by line. Okay, so this program is called using find.py, and I'll give you these programs that you can download them each week from the lesson if you'd like to run them yourself. Now, this program starts right at the top. This is a Python program, and this is running inside Emacs, but you can use whatever editor you want to edit your stuff. So I import Pymongo, and then I import sys, and I need both of these libraries. This is for the exception handling, and Pymongo is so that I can attach the database. Then I get a connection to the database by calling Mongo client and assign it to the connection variable. My connection string is mongodb://localhost because the database is running on my localhost. In another terminal window, I've started MongoD running. And now I need to connect to the scores collection. So to do that, first I get a connection to the school database, so db equals connection.school, and then I get a connection to the scores database, scores equals db.scores. Now we're going to look at both find and find1. First, let's look at find1. Take you through there. So looking at the find1 function, which I've written here, you can see what it does is it prints that it's reporting for duty. Then it sets up a query as a Python dictionary. It says it's looking for the document which has a student ID of 10. Now, a thing to note here is that Python dictionaries require you to quote the key. This is not true in JavaScript. We wouldn't have had to quote this, but we do have to quote it here. After that, we put the find1 in a try except block. And since it's a find1, it's not going to return a cursor. It's going to return a single document. And so I call find1 on the scores collection, scores.find1, find_1 with the query. Now, in the shell, it was find1 with a capital O. It was camel cased. Here, it's find_1. Now, each of the drivers names things in a way that are idiomatic for the language itself. And in Python, it's much more typical to use underscores for function names. So that's why it's named this way inside Python. So you're going to notice these types of differences throughout the drivers. In addition, the drivers now implement a new specification called the CRUD spec, which slightly changes the way you access data inside MongoDB relative to what you'll see in the shell. And this Python driver is one of the first drivers to conform to the CRUD spec. And this is a beta version of the driver that if you started on the first day of class, if you started a week later, or if you're a few weeks into the class, it's a release version of a driver. So this is the latest and greatest interface to the database. So you're seeing the most modern way of accessing data within MongoDB. So anyway, getting back to the program, we assign the result of find1 to a document, and then we print it out. Pretty simple. And in order to make sure that we call find1, I need to call, this is my main loop essentially, outside of any function inside Python. I call the find1 function, which will invoke find1. All right, so let's now go into the regular Unix shell and invoke Python interpreter on this program. All right, so we did that. So what happened is it printed exactly as we expected, find1 reporting for duty, and then it printed the document. Now you remember that inside Python, all we did is say print doc, and then by some miracle, we got something that is essentially readable. One of the nice things about Python is it does a pretty good job printing complex objects to the screen. So you can see here that it prints one document. We asked for the one where student ID was 10, and we got that. Student ID 10, it has an underscore ID, which is an object ID, and then the type of this record was exam. That was arbitrary, since we didn't actually specify that inside the query, which record we were going to get for the student. So we could have gotten a quiz, we could have gotten an exam, but we actually got an exam, and then the score itself. And so that's it. That's all you need to do to pull data out of MongoDB using Python. It's very easy. Now you'll notice that the student ID is actually a floating point number. That student ID is stored in the database as a floating point number because when we created this data using the JavaScript shell, we didn't do anything special, and the only number type built into JavaScript is a floating point type. MongoDB does support integers directly, and we could have inserted an integer in there, but that's not what we did in that small JavaScript program where I loaded the data. So okay, now let's see how we would call find, not find1, if we wanted to get a whole bunch of documents. To do that, we're going to look at this program right here. This is the find. I also have a function that calls find right here. It's in the same file, so it has access to the same variables. And find is going to do something slightly different. It's going to do a query where type is exam, and it's going to call find on that query. Again, the query is in the form of a Python dictionary. And you're going to get a cursor back this time, not a document, because you have multiple things returned. And if it raises an exception, that'll happen over here. Now, provided you don't get an exception, we want to print out these documents. And so I'm just going to iterate through the documents in the cursor. I'm going to say for doc in cursor in Python, print doc. And this stuff about sanity is just limiting the number of things it prints to 10 and then breaking. So I'm just limiting how much I print to the screen. Now to make sure that I run find versus find1, I have to change my program to call find. So I will do that. And now I'm going to go to the terminal and run it. And when I do that, I get a whole bunch of data this time, all of it with type equal exam. So this is pretty much what we'd expect. All right, it is now time for a quiz. This is a program very similar to the one that you saw in this lesson. And in this program, you can see that we once again connect to the school's database and the scores collection. And we try to pull data out of the database, except we've removed one line, which is this XXXXX. And what we'd like you to do is write the one line of Python that would find data, a single document, put it into the variable document so that it can be printed out. So write that line here, and that's the answer.